Now, the illusion of distinction or difference is due to certain apparent superimpositions, limiting adjuncts as they may be called, which are associated with this body. So, just as small children may think that the sky or the space is polluted by clouds or dust, similarly, those who are not spiritually enlightened enough may think that this individual soul is associated with so many adjectives like happiness, unhappiness, sorrow, different types of experiences. But in reality, the Atman, the soul, the self, the supreme consciousness is totally free from any of these associations. This idea was put forward. And also I tried to explain the three approaches in Vedanta, in Advaita Vedanta, in analyzing the relationship between the individual soul and the Atman or the self. The Advaita theory is this: there is only one reality, and that supreme reality reflects on our intellect or mind, and due to this we feel that we are different. In reality, there is only one supreme reality. Just as different vessels made of clay, like say glasses or pots, pans and so on, they appear to be different, or the space within them appear to be different. That verse, in fact, that is the topic we are going to deal with today in greater detail. Gaudapada, the author, drives home the idea, and his intention is to establish what is called in Sanskrit technically Ajadivada, or the doctrine of non-origination. I shall explain this in greater detail, which is important in this context. So as I said earlier, there are three approaches or three theories which Advaitins put forward to analyze the relationship between the individual soul and the cosmic universal soul, with a view to establish the unity, the non-difference, and the oneness between the individual soul and the Supreme Self. Their purpose is to establish that the Atman, the Self, the consciousness is one. The apparent diversity is only an illusion. This idea is explained in the light of three theories. The first one, as I said, it's called limitation theory. In Sanskrit, it is called Avachedavada. Now, this theory is upheld by a great Vedantin who lived in the 9th century. His name, as I said earlier, was Vajaspati Misra. I gave some details of how he happened to write this great work. Bhamati, that's the name of the text. Now, according to him, the unlimited supreme reality comes to be viewed as limited. So limitation is only conceptual, unreal, or it is imaginary. The example, as I said, suppose there is a pot sitting in front of you. Inside the pot there is space. Space is called in Sanskrit Akasha. Sometimes in some technical books you find ether, but space may be a better, more intelligible translation. Less technical. So inside the jar or a pot or a glass there is space. You have to think of an empty pot, of course. An empty pot. Now, there is space outside the vessel and there is space within the vessel. Now, apparently, you feel that the space within the jar is limited by the shape of the jar or the size of the jar. So, jar or pot may be called ghata in Sanskrit, ghataka, this is masculine gender. And the space which appears to be confined to that pot is called ghata akasha, means space which really is not limited or confined to the pot but appears to be so. So this limitation is only imaginary. This is the implication of limitation theory of Vachaspati. So the supreme reality, the universal consciousness, the unlimited absolute reality appears to be limited, but it is only an appearance. In reality, it is undivided, one single reality. This is one approach. In other words, when you apply this to individual soul, universal soul relationship, you have to say that this body, this mind, this intellect, all these are peculiar to every individual soul. Body is different. In fact, you will be surprised. There is an interesting context in Manisha Panchakam, which is one of Shankaracharya's small verses. I am not going to details. The idea is well established there. What is the difference between different human beings? Now, with regard to body, every human being is the same. Everything in this world is made of matter, 5 elements. So what difference is there? What distinction is there? Every human or even animal bodies are also made of 5 elements. The 5 elements constitute what we call material entities. So everything is the same. Well, then what about Atman? Atman is also the same. Consciousness is also the same. In every living being, this consciousness, Atman or self, manifests. So there is no distinction with regard to body and no distinction with regard to soul. Then where is the distinction? The distinction only is with regard to the degree of manifestation of this Atman. If you have now let us say there are 7, let's say the total human population in the world is 7 billion. You can compare the 7 billion people to 7 billion mirrors. These 7 billion, among these 7 billion mirrors, some mirror may be very clean, some may not be. And some mirror may be extremely dirty. Now, what is the degree of reflection of the sun? The reflection of the sun is in direct proportion to the cleanliness, the purity of the surface of the mirror. If you clean the mirror properly, then the sun gets more completely reflected. The reflection becomes more complete, more pure. If it is dirty, then reflection is very, very vague and very, it is not, it is at very, very low level. Now, what is the mirror? Mirror is our mind, our intellect. Sanskrit called buddhi or intellect or manaha, which means the mind. Mind is nothing but a function of the human tendencies in a fluctuating dimension, as I said earlier. If you analyze your own mind, mind is nothing but a series of conflicting thought currents. So William James defined it as mind stream consciousness. But modern psychologists explain mind as an endless, continuous flow of or a stream of consciousness. Vedantins accept this, but they give a more detailed description of this phenomenon. They say there is conflict in this stream consciousness. There's a continuous flow. So often you find mind never remains steady, except for a yogi or an advanced spiritual personality. Otherwise, mind is unsteady. Mind speculates. There are conflicting thought currents always flashing through mind. Now, and what is intellect? So that's called Sankalpa, Vikalpa, Atmika, Antakarana, Vritti, Mana. This is the definition of mind. Sankalpa means one line of tendencies, impressions, thought currents. Vikalpa means its opposite. So there are conflicting thought currents. And intellect is that faculty of the same phenomenon which decides. So Nischayatmika, Antakarana, Vritti, Buddhi. Buddhi or intellect is that dimension of mind with same phenomenon. Antakarana is called internal organs. So Buddhi or intellect is that aspect of internal organs which comes to a decision with regard to what an object is. Now, when this Atman gets reflected on a pure mind, that mind ceases to be mind. Mind is mind only when there are conflicts. That's called Sankalpa and Vikalpa. Sankalpa means a stream of positive thought currents. Vikalpa means its opposite. So, and when your mind is still, as in the case of a yogi or an advanced spiritual personality, there is no conflict, there is no tension. So, it ceases to be mind, it is no more mind. Sometimes called in yoga philosophy, and according to some Vedanta schools, it is called Amani Bhava, means mind becomes non-mind. Mind ceases to be mind, mind becomes non-mind. Now, in a Buddha or a Shankaracharya or a Vivekananda or Ramakrishna Paramahamsa or great spiritual personalities, in a Holy Mother, such great personality, Jesus, you find this Atman is fully reflected under mind consciousness, because the mind is free from tension. Mind is purity itself. Ramana Maharshi in this context says, when mind is turned inward, it is Atman. When mind is turned outward, it is mind. So mind is mind only when it is turned inward, because mind's normal function is to flow towards external objects through the channels of the five senses of perception and indirectly through the five senses of action. Five senses of perception become the direct channels through mind automatically flows towards external objects. When the mind stops flowing towards external objects, then mind is turned inward. Or rather, when mind is turned inward, it stops flowing towards external objects. Then it is one with Atman, there is no more mind. The same is true of Buddhi as well, or intellect also. So, 7 billion people are 7 billion mirrors in which Atman or self is reflected. In this context, Swami Vivekananda said, as I quoted a few times earlier, the difference between an amoeba and a Buddha is one of degrees, not of kind. Buddha in Sanskrit means the enlightened one. Amoeba is a very primitive creature at the bottom line of evolution, physical, biological evolution. See, in an amoeba also, Atman reflects. But the mirror, the internal organ, which is called Antakarana, Buddhi and mind, are very primitive. So the reflection is is at a very low level. In a Buddha, the enlightened one, it is on a higher level, all great spiritual personalities. So that's why I said earlier, the difference between different human beings is only with regard to the degree of manifestation of this immanent reality, the consciousness, or the Atman, or the self. Otherwise, there is no distinction. As to body, the same. As to Atman, the same. Atman is universal, omnipresent, all-pervading. And body, the same 5 elements constitute all human or non-human bodies as well. So where is the difference? The difference is only with regard to the degree of manifestation. Now, as I said sometime in another earlier context, I said, so there is an interesting episode in the life of Socrates. Socrates was sentenced to death. He was accused of misleading the young men of Athens. So, in fact, Socrates came a bit too early. Socrates was far in advance of the contemporary Greek civilization. Greek civilization was essentially a body-oriented civilization. Perfection at a bodily level, at a material level. So you find ancient Greeks excelled in aesthetics, with your mind and body, of course. Mind also at the primitive material level. So Socrates was beyond the comprehension of the contemporary Greek intellectuals, Greek elite. So he was sentenced to death, but nobody could understand him except a few like Plato and others. Now, one of his friend and also indirectly his disciple. He was not a disciple in the sense Plato was a disciple. His name is Crito. So he wanted to pay visit to Socrates. He somehow managed to get entry into the prison the early morning, maybe. And Socrates was sleeping. He was fast asleep. He was not bothered. In fact, Crito, who was so much anxious about Socrates, but the man who was about to die maybe within a few hours was absolutely free from all botherations. He was deep asleep, and Crito waited. And then there's a long dialogue in Plato's dialogues, you find. Plato is all Socrates' theories, ideas only. So, how could you manage to enter the prison? Why, if you came so early, why didn't you disturb me? Why didn't you wake me up? So, Crito said, I didn't want to disturb you because you were fast asleep. And then Crito asked him, how shall we bury you? What kind of burial do you want? So then Socrates replied, as to body, do unto my body what you do unto other bodies. That is the translation. And before that he said, you should be able to catch the real me. You should be able to catch the real me. So even Socrates had an idea of the real me, which is different from my body, my intellect, my mind, all that. So you can find these higher mystical, spiritual, universal ideas on different, but maybe called philosophical parallelisms in ancient world. Now, the first theory, as I said, was the Avachedavada. We are coming back to the subject. Next one is Bimba Pratibimba. It is called reflection theory. This theory was mostly held by one of Shankaracharya's own disciples who wrote a famous book, Panchapatiga, which is a short super commentary on related to Brahma Sutra Bhashya of Shankara, and also by one of his followers called Prakashatma Yeti. It's called Panchapatiga Vivaranam. That is the advanced super commentary on Panchapatiga. See, this particular school of philosophers, Advaitins, are called, they are called this Vivarana Prasthana, means the school of Vivarana school of Advaitins. The earlier school who hold the theory of limitation theory is called. That school was known as Bhamati school, and the school which upheld this reflection theory was known as Vivarana school. the Vivarana name was given after the famous Vedantic text called Panchapadika Vivaranam. It's a commentary on Panchapadika, which is written by Padmapada, who was a direct disciple of Shankaracharya. Padmapada's Panchapadika. The third school, as I mentioned, is called, it is called Abhasavada school. It is called, it's called Vartika school. Vartikam is a commentary in metrical form on another commentary. Vartikam it is called. So it is a huge book, very huge book, written by another disciple of Shankaracharya, Sureshwara. So he wrote two Vartikas, Taittiriya Upanishad Bhashya Vartikam and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad Bhashya Vartikam. It's a very, very voluminous, important work. So the Vartikanta Atma Brahma Vidya, it means there is nothing in Brahma Vidya tradition which is not referred to or explained in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad Bhashya Vartikam of Sureshwara. So it's a very famous book. According to them, they believe that this apparent difference is only an illusion. That means this world is actually an appearance. That's all. It's a primary appearance and also secondary appearance. So according to them, this distinction is only an appearance. These are the three theories which I just, as a context I mentioned. Now we will come to the sixth verse that I referred to earlier. Sixth verse of the third chapter of the Mandukya Karika, Advaita Prakaranam it's called. Rupakarya samakhyascha vidyante tatra tatra vai akasasya na bhedosti taddur jiveshu nirnayaha. It's a famous verse. Now, how do the great spiritual personalities, Advaitins, how do they come to a decision with regard to the non-difference between different jivas, different individual souls and the universal soul? That is the subject here. So those of you who want to refer the prose order can see Rupakarya Samakhyaha cha tatra tatra vidyante vai akasasya bhetaka na asti tadvat jiveshu nirnayaha. See here, Rupa actually means form. Karya means utility, usefulness. Samakhya means name. Now, again you have to think of the large number of vessels sitting in front of you. Well, right in front of you on a table, there are some glasses, maybe pots, pans, jars made of clay or whatever maybe. Now, there are differences among them, among these vessels, some differences. You can't use a pot for drinking water. You can't use a glass for bringing water from a well. You need a pot. And for drinking water, you need a glass. For storing water on your table, you need a jar. So with regard to utility or usefulness, there is a difference. So, and according to shape and usefulness, utility, value, you may call the small one a glass, you may call the big one a pot, and you may call the medium-sized one as a jar. Why? Because there is a difference with regard to utility, usefulness, shape, size, and also naturally name. But they are all made of the same clay. And another point, in all these vessels, if they are empty, there is the space confined to them. So the space in a glass is small compared to the space within a huge pot. Now, so we may think the space is different. In another context, the Gaudapada will refer to small children looking at the sky. and maybe in the evening when there is a lot, there are clouds in the sky, dust particles also. So children will think the sky is dirty, the space is dirty because of clouds, dust and all that. But actually the space can never be dirty. The space can never be affected either by clouds or by the dust. But children, if small kids, if you tell them, why is the sky or the space red in color, maybe black in color? Well, if you tell them, it's because the dust or clouds have made it dirty, filthy, or like that, or discolored space like that, they will believe. Similarly, people who are not spiritually evolved will believe that each individual soul is different from each other individual soul. That is the philosophy of Madhva Siddhanta. Madhvas believe so, Now, according to Madhva, there is a distinction between each individual soul. There is a distinction between each entity in the universe. And there is a distinction between God and everything in this world. So, as I said, if you draw a triangle and if you place God on the top and both sides the world and individual souls, then you can think of 5 differences. The difference between God and individual soul, the difference between God and the world, and the difference between world and individual souls, the difference among the individual souls, and the difference among the different entities in the universe, between tree, mountain, and so on. They are all different. X is Y, different from Y. 2 human beings, they are entirely different. God is also different from everything in this world. So practically, it's called Panchabheda Siddhanta, the doctrine of 5 differences. So that's there's a famous definition of Madhva's famous theory. Sriman Madhvamate Hari Paratara Satyam Jagat Tattvudu Bhedo Jivaganaha Hareha Anucharaha Nicho Chabhavam Gataha Muktir Naija Sukhanu Bhuti Ramala Bhaktischatat Sadhanam Hyakshadit Tritayam Pramanam Akhilam Amnayaga Vedyo Hari. That is Madhva Siddhanta. According to him, Vishnu is one God, only one reality. He has got form, he has got name, he has got certain characteristics. There's a main difference between Abrahamic concepts of God and Hindu theistic or Hindu monotheistic religions. All Ramanuja, Madhva, all these are monotheistic religions within Vedantic tradition. The difference is, in Abrahamic tradition, God has got qualities, attributes. God has got a name also, many names, so you find many of them. In some religions, there are many names. I don't want to refer to all the religious traditions, highly controversial, especially in modern times. Now, again, so God has got a place where he lives. God has got a name, characteristics, but no form. But in Madhva tradition, or rather in Vedantic theistic tradition, the Ramanuja, Madhva, Vallabha, Nimparka, and so on, Chaitanya school and so on, they believe in a God with a name, characteristics, a place they live, and also a definite form. So Vishnu is the God of Madhva. Why I am giving this example? On the one end of the pendulum, you can see Shankara and Gaudapada proclaiming to the world that the reality is one, the reality is beyond attributes. They do not deny the possibility of having attributes. What they imply is the reality, the supreme reality, transcends attributes. The reality has no form, means it's beyond form, beyond words, it is omnipresent, it is immanent, all-pervading, it is transcendental, and it is one. So everything in this world is an expression of the same divine consciousness, reality. As I said earlier, the difference is with regard to the degree of manifestation of this inner divinity within. As I said, according to Swamiji, the difference between an amoeba and a Buddha is one of degrees, not of kind. Now, according to Dvaita Siddhanta, which is the other end of the pendulum, everything is different from everything else. So, the first principle is Vishnu is the God who is the supreme. And again, the difference between God and jivas, individual souls, the difference between God and the world, the difference between different individual souls among themselves, and the difference among the different entities within the world, all these differences are permanent and absolute. That is one thing. In Advaita, the difference is only with regard to the degree of manifestation. Means our own spiritual evolution. That's why in Dvaita Siddhanta, Madhvacharya Siddhanta, there is a special place where there is a special place that's called Naraga or hell, where people take permanent residence, eternal damnation. In the entire religious tradition, there is only one philosophy, religious philosophy, which tells you that there is a permanent residence, and that is Naraka, means hell. And some people take permanent residence. They can never come out. Neither repentance or surrender to Jesus, as in Christian monotheism, or surrender to Allah in Islam, or spiritual practices as in Hinduism. None of these things will work. Permanently you are damned. So this is one special characteristic of Dvaita Siddhanta or dualistic philosophy or Madhva Siddhanta. I am giving a picture of this to show you the other end, the other picture of Vedanta. Because Madhvacharya's Dvaita philosophy, dualistic philosophy is also part of Vedanta. It is only the beginning, the most primitive stage of Vedantic evolution. So the Vishnu is supreme and the differences are permanent. The world is permanently real. There is absolute difference between different entities in the world. And there is a evolving gradation among different deities. And all the individual souls are servants of God. The difference between individual souls and God is, the relationship between individual souls and God is one of servitude, abject surrender. And this awareness is called liberation. These are some of the characteristics of dualistic philosophy. Because in Shankara and Gaudapada, we are dealing with the highest Advaita philosophy or non-dualistic system. In Madhvacharya, we are dealing with the other end, the dualistic philosophy, which is based on differences. Now coming back to this verse. What this verse says is this. This means the 6th verse, I think, 6th verse, yes. Rupa means form, that is Sanskrit word. Karya means utility, usefulness, function. And then Samakhya means name. All these differ. But these differences with regard to different vessels or different entities like pots, pans, glasses, etc., do not really divide space, though somebody looking at them may feel that the space within the glass is smaller than the space confined to a jar or a pot. But actually, these vessels do not divide space. Similarly, the difference with regard to either the mirror on which the reality is reflected, as in Bimba Pratibimba, or the mind and the intellect and mind through which the reality start functioning, all these do not actually create a difference or distinction between the Supreme Consciousness, Atman, and the individual jivas, individual souls. That is the idea behind. So, but then we have one point is that there are some objections raised by some non-Vedantic philosophers. They will tell you, on one point, there could be a difference. That is practical utility. You cannot use a big pot for drinking water, and you cannot use a small cup or a glass for bringing water from a distant place, from a pond to your home. You need a bigger vessel. So there is a difference with regard to utility. It's in Sanskrit called vyavahara, practical utility. Now, Vedantins will reply that this difference is only secondary. This difference is only secondary. In reality, this difference with regard to the size of or the utility of these instruments doesn't affect the unity or oneness of the space. That is the idea behind. Now we'll come to 7th verse. This idea is stressed from another angle. Na akasasya ghadakasu vikara avayavo yatha naivatmana sada jivo vikara avayavo yatha. See, the prosody is this: yatha ghadakasya. These terms should be understood. Maybe it is very simple. Ghada means pot. Akasha means space. In some books it is translated as ether. Maybe same. Now, vikara means change. Avayava means part. Similar. Now, the idea is this: yatha ghadakashaka akasasya vikara avayavo na tatha jivaha sada atmanaha vikara avayavo na. This idea behind. Somebody may ask the question: the space confined within a pot is a part of the outer space. If you take space as one single unit, a vast space, and if you relate it, if you compare it with the smaller space within a pot, then somebody can argue that the space confined to a pot could be termed as a part of the outer space. But this is only an imaginary relationship analysis, because this vessel is not a permanent entity. When you form a vessel, you feel that a space is carved out of, a smaller unit of space is carved out of the bigger unit, a universal space. So this is only imaginary. Another argument may be, it may be a part of it. So both these arguments are wrong. Somebody may argue, if you think of a tree, a branch of a tree or a leaf of a tree, the trunk of the tree. All these are different parts of the tree taken as a single unit. Similarly, the space confined to a pot or the space confined to a glass should be considered to be parts of the vast universal space. This part and whole relationship is only secondary. It is only relative. It is not permanent. Before you created this glass, before you created this pot, Ghatakasha, or the space confined to the jar or a pot, did not exist. If you break it, then also it will not exist. It is only relative. So what is relative cannot be considered to be the reality. It comes and goes. So its existence is relative. So what is relative ceases to exist when you look upon it from the angle of the absolute. See, relativity is understood when you realize what is absolute. Because the relativity of the relative is recognized to be the relative only when you transcend the relative. At the spiritual level, we look upon the entire creation as one reality, a Brahman or Atman, only when we are in that state of samadhi, or in that state of the perfect unity of the individual soul and the supreme consciousness. The Sri Ramakrishna analyzes this from a practical angle. So he says, see, when you are in the highest samadhi level, when you are experiencing the unity of the individual soul and the universal soul, then there is no word, there is nothing. There is only pure experience. And pure experience has no description, definition, or verbalization. And then you have to come down several steps below. Then you are coming to the stage of Om. It's called Pranava. I say we analyze this Omkara in the earlier part of the Mandukya Upanishad. Om is it is symbolic of the supreme reality. So even Omkara, which is symbolic of the totality of human experience. Omkara or Pranava is symbolic, or it corresponds to the totality of human experience and existence, entire existence. Now, but that analysis is possible only when you come down several steps from the state of that innate experience, which is called samadhi. And what about these Mandukya, Acharya, Upanishads, etc., where all these things are explained? You have to come down several steps even from that Omkara to reach the level of Vedas, Upanishads, the scriptures, etc. So at the highest experience level, there is no word. You cannot verbalize, you cannot define that experience. That's what Sri Ramakrishna implies. So this absolute reality is experienced only at the highest samadhi level, and at that samadhi level we do not experience the relative. So the relative and the complete and absolutely non-existent merge into one at the highest experience level. As I said earlier, in Vedanta we analyze the reality from the lowest level of complete non-existence to the highest level of absolute existence. There are certain things in the world that we can never even imagine, we cannot even intellectually conceive of. As I said, the city in the sky, Gandharva Nagaram, you find in Mandukya Upanishad books, or the horn of a hare. A hare can never have horn. Or There can never be a city in the sky. All these examples are stock illustrations found in the earlier books, even before the works of Shankaracharya. All these similes and illustrations were used by Buddhist thinkers, both Vijnanavadins and also great Shunyavadins, Buddhist philosophers like Nagarjuna, who wrote Madhyamika Karika. So, there are certain things which are completely non-existent, which we cannot even intellectually conceive of. Then there are certain things that we can intellectually conceive of, but we realize that they are absolutely non-existent when we experience certain things even in the relative world. As I already explained last time, you have to think of the rope-snake analogy. When a rope is mistaken for a snake in semi-darkness, the person who makes that mistake goes out in search of a stick. But when he returns, when he brings light, he realizes it is only a rope. Now, what about a snake? What is the status of reality of that snake? The snake is only snake idea. It is not absolutely non-existent. We can never imagine the rope for the snake if the snake idea itself was inconceivable. The snake does exist maybe in the zoo or in the forest. The person may have seen the snake the previous day in a forest. So naturally he superimposes that snake idea on the piece of rope. The snake is not completely non-existent. It can exist as an idea. But the illusoriness of the snake idea is realized at the relative level itself. When he brings light, this rope is recognized, so the snake idea vanishes. What about the rope? The rope and the entire universe are all relative. For a highly evolved person who has reached the highest of Advaitic experience, even the rope itself is as non-existent as the snake or everything else, because Brahman or Atman alone exists. From the highest point of view, the experience point of view. That means from the point of view in Samadhi, where the individual soul realizes, experiences his unity or her unity with the universal supreme soul. So, Jiva Brahma Aikya Anubhuti is called in Sanskrit. The experience of the unity of the individual soul with the universal cosmic reality or universal soul. Now, we have already reached the end of our time. We have just about 5 minutes. If you have got anything to ask, I can clarify. We have just about 5 minutes to discuss anything that you would like to discuss. Yes, what really happens? See, when a highly evolved person reaches the highest experience, he becomes a completely transformed person. He may come back and continue living this world, but the experience or the fact that he is one with the entire creation, with the entire universal reality, will be always there as a background within him. He may live in the world, work in the world, but the world and all its variations will not affect him. That's the main difference. So, a spiritually evolved soul, a great soul who has reached the highest Advaitic or non-dualistic experience, may also live in the world, work for the good of the world. The main difference is that person won't be affected by what happens in this world. He can, in the Gita, of course, when Sri Krishna explains the practical dynamics of the psychology of karma yoga, he says, "Karmani akarmaya pasyed, akarmani cha karmayaka, sa buddhiman manusheshu, sa yukta Krishna karma karta." Here, Lord Krishna explains who is a yogi. Yukta here means yogi. Buddhiman means a person of the highest spiritual wisdom, who has experienced the wisdom. So, he say, and now he says that person, and he says Krishna karma means the one who does everything. So the highest spiritual person who has reached the highest level of Advaitic or non-dualistic experience may live the world, and he may do everything, but the difference is, even when he is completely involved in various activities, within him he will have the strong conviction based on his own practical experience that is the Atman, is the self, which is not affected by any activities, by anything that happens in the world, which is completely free from any agentship or enjoyership. So this inner detachment inner detachment, non-attachment from everything that he does is the fundamental difference between a great spiritual person and an ordinary person who lives in the world, who suffers and enjoys. One example, striking example, is in Shankaracharya's life there is a very touching experience. He was the one who, apart from teaching Advaita, writing the most outstanding philosophical works, spiritual works in Sanskrit literature, he founded many temples, modified the modes of worship in hundreds of temples, wrote the most sublime, beautiful Sanskrit poetry, established the modes, and established no less than 10 monastic orders. With all that, and not only that, he visited many temples and he modified the forms of worship. For example, he went to Kanchipuram and human sacrifice was practiced in Kanchipuram temple. He was the one who stopped it. This Shankaracharya was approached by a Kapaliga, some people who, they follow a peculiar kind of religion. They believe that if they could sacrifice the life of a highly spiritually evolved person, they will get some occult powers. These are, in ancient India, all types of most primitive types of religions also existed, with the highest, most sublime types of Advaita or non-dualistic philosophy. So, a person who was practicing this kind of necromancy, black magic, or human sacrifice, approached Shankaracharya and prostrated before him and requested, "Please give me your head." That was the only thing he wanted. He didn't want any spiritual instruction. Because he thought by sacrificing Shankaracharya's head, he will get some spiritual occult powers. Shankaracharya tried to correct him. He tried to bring him to spiritual wisdom. But the fellow could not be converted. If he won't change his mind. Then he said, "If you really think that by taking my head you can get these occult powers, all right, go ahead." And he agreed. But be careful. If one of my disciples sees you, they will kill you, destroy. So Shankaracharya asked him, "You come on a particular day, I shall be ready. You can take me to a sacred place and take my head and offer it to some horrible deity." All these kind of diabolical practices also prevailed in those days in primitive parts of India. And of course, now on the way, one of his disciples, Padmapadacharya, came to know of it, and he came and saved Shankaracharya. He took the form of a lion, that's the mythology says, and killed this occult practitioner. Okay, now the idea, why did Shankaracharya allow this man to take his head? He was the one who stopped all the diabolical religious practices prevailing in those days. Totemism, human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, all these things were practiced by some primitive people in those days. But Shankaracharya traveled all over India today, including today's Afghanistan, Pakistan, Burma, Bangladesh, all this, Sri Lanka. And he stopped all this. But he was willing to give his head because the body is nothing, comes and goes. But he wanted to deny it. So this is the sign of a person of the highest spiritual experience. And look at Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa. Sri Ramakrishna was suffering from cancer. Still, when somebody asked for instruction, he was ready to teach. Sri Ramakrishna was teaching, even when he was suffering from extreme pain, excruciating pain from cancer. Still, he continued teaching. Because for them, body is just as different from their entity as a piece of stick they may be holding in their hands. If you may be holding a stick in your hands, if somebody cuts that stick, it won't hurt you. So they could look upon their own body as something different from their true entity, true self. So along with involvement in activities for the good of the world, for the good of others, they will also have this perfect non-attachment. That is the result of this experience, spiritual wisdom. This combination of both. So they could do everything, still remain non-attached.